Hey everyone, it's Q Grows. I'm just jumping in real quick to kind of have a disclaimer before today's episode. We are interviewing Joe Pietri. He's an author of some books about the cannabis history, and he's going to go on to talk about his experience in Amsterdam and Nepal, smuggling, and then he goes on to talk about some people. He makes some accusations about some individuals in the community and has some opinions that I just want to say that are his accusations and opinions. They are not Cannabis's. I'm not saying that they are right or wrong or whatever. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that these are coming from him, not from Cannabis. But we want to also give him the platform to tell his story. So that's all I wanted to say. Before we go into the episode, I also want to thank a couple sponsors. Lost Coast Plant Therapy. Thank you so much. You can get them at lostcoastplanttherapy.com and also sacred3mushrooms.com. You can get your own home grow kits for $80. Go to their website, sacred3mushrooms.com, and use code Cannabis. That's it. Let's get into the episode. What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now on Cannabis, and if you're joining us on YouTube or Spotify or the podcastosphere, thank you so much for joining us. We have a great episode today. We are going to be going into cannabis history. JR's got a great episode for us today with our guest, Joe Pietri. But before we get into it, I'm going to throw it over to JR this time, and he's going to kick off the episode. Let's go, JR.
All right, excellent. I just first want to shout out to Tiki. Tiki's got his Krampus sale. Buy a pack of stickers, get a free pack of Stinkies seeds. And Raw Genetics is doing their 12 days of Christmas, and they already dropped their pineapple Ziggy Guy drop, and it sold out almost immediately. So keep your eye out for rawgenetics.io and TikiSeeds.com. But I want to get into this interview because I have a feeling our guest is going to walk away. So today we have Joe Pietri. He's an author of books, King of Nepal, Life Before the Drug War. Another one is the 15-ounce pound Big Pharma's plan to patent pot. And we're about to get a history lesson, folks. And I just want to do a disclaimer. If you don't agree with Joe's narrative and you're butthurt about it, then go ahead and come on the show, get a hold of me. We're glad to hear your side of it. But I think Joe's going to break down some very interesting shit for us today, and I'm really excited about it. So welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. We always ask our first guests how they fell in love with the plant and how it's gotten them to where they are today.
Well, I started smoking in 1963. So, it's like everybody starts. When you do something and you like it because it was really good, then you want to buy some. So immediately, the first time you smoke some weed and you love it, you become a dealer because the next time you'll buy an ounce and split it with your friends, right? And so that's how it basically starts. I grew up during Reefer Madness. They had Reefer Madness on the TV once every year, the $1 Million Movie for a week. They did the Reefer Madness videos where they show people going mad after smoking pot and this and that. The history of marijuana, it's always has been legal. Okay. The only time let me start it this way. The British, right? When they took over India for 200 years, they copied the pharmacopoeia of the Ayurvedic medicine and the herbal medicines there, and they did with the same. The English did the same thing with the Chinese. The English, basically, the pharmacopoeia, it was created by Indian research and Chinese research who were doing, people say to me, about the Chinese. The Chinese invented capitalism. Okay, they had the first pharmacopoeia. They had remedies for all kinds of things. In India, they did eye operations. At 5,000 years ago. So when the British came to India, they copied the pharmacopoeia and brought some of it back to England. One of it was O'Shaughnessy. He brought back a marijuana tincture, which was basically good for everything. Cannabis is one of the most important medicines of all time. Why? Because you have an endocannabinoid system in your body. If you didn't have that endocannabinoid system, it wouldn't work when you smoke pot. It wouldn't work medically. So marijuana has always been medical. So when the British discovered it in India, they went back to England, and they started making tinctures of it, and tinctures of cannabis. Cannabis tinctures is probably the most popular medicine of all time. You have different marijuana. One that if you're hungry, it makes you hungry. One that takes away your headache. There's so many remedies for cannabis. It's ridiculous. Marijuana for it to be illegal is sort of stupid because it wouldn't even work if you didn't have an endocannabinoid system. All animals, all mammals have that system. So horses or cows or anything like that, pigs, it works on them because they have an endocannabinoid system. In Nepal, you'll always see a weed growing near a farmhouse, and they use the weed to give to the animals to keep their appetites up. Or if they're feeling sluggish, they'll give them marijuana. Marijuana has been one of the most important medicines of all time. It was completely illegal. The only time it became illegal is when the British came over. They made a tincture of cannabis. Cannabis tincture. It was very popular during a civil war. It became very, very popular in England in the 1850s, and then very popular in the States in the 1860s. They had cannabis tinctures. They had opium tinctures. They had many, many different kinds of tinctures. And so it's a funny thing, the English were in India for 200 years. When they were in India, they didn't make marijuana or opium or hashish illegal. They taxed it. So the king of Nepal would have his slaves produce crops that they sold to the British government. The British during the time when medicines were made naturally, the cannabis industry was huge. Parker Davis, which now is Pfizer, they had the biggest tincture factory on the Detroit River. They had ships that could come in and unload like ships full of weed where they processed it into different types of tinctures. So the tinctures, they patented it. When the patents ran out on cannabis, they made it illegal because they didn't want anybody to know the secrets of cannabis. All the remedies, all the things that it did, all the good things that it did for you. I mean, all the
Joe. Is that when they started slandering snake oil and coming up with all these kind of slanderous terms to try to mitigate it and make it demonized?
No, that's you have to realize there were no rules and there was no FDA in those days. So people, you wanted you needed some pain medication. They made you an opium tincture. You wanted an energizer, or you wanted to sleep better, or you wanted there are many remedies for the use of cannabis. So so in those days you had what they call quack medicines that were basically made out of herbal remedies. Some of them actually worked. Some of them were made with cannabis. Some of them made with cannabis and opium. They found that when you add cannabis to opium, it intensifies the effects of opium, and you use less opium. That was one of the things that they figured out. So in the 30s, when the cannabis patents, because at that point you had all the quack doctors that were doing that out west, but then there were pharmaceutical companies that were making pharmaceutical grade medicines, and they were
Like
called
Bayer.
the patent medicines. You had Bayer, you had Parker Davis, you had Lilly, you had a lot of these companies. That all these companies like Lilly, Parker Davis, Pfizer, Abbott, all those companies, they made their initial fortunes on opium and cannabis and medicines. So the pharmaceutical companies came in and commercialized it. So
I'd like to go ahead and fast forward now. So how did you start your smuggling journey, and how did you get into Nepal?
I was selling a lot of hash, and I got the opportunity to go back to Nepal and pay off a deal that we had done. And so I was sent to Nepal by Peter Kelly. He was like rock star he was a dealer to the rock stars in New York.
How old were you?
I was like 21, 22.
So you were almost a kid.
I was a kid and it was funny because I was a kid. I was 23 years old. I had some cards made up that said that I was the director of the zoological department of the Bronx Zoological Department. And I passed myself off and started to do zoological exchanges in Nepal. In like 2 Himalayan bears for 2 panda bear for 4 panda bears for 2 chimpanzees, 2 brown bears, American brown bears, for 2 Nepali black bears. I was starting to do those kind of things. I was sending dogs back and forth. It was a make-believe scam. Nobody ever got in any trouble because in those days you didn't need a social security number to open up a bank account. So you could open up a bank account in any ID that you had. So what we did is open up a bank account and an ID we had, and we hired a custom broker to collect a dog at the airport and deliver it to a veterinarian who put the dog in quarantine for 2 weeks. And then we went in, and after we watched it, there was no heat to the package. We went in and took the dog out. Well, the first time that we picked the dog up at the airport, they brought a drug sniffing dog out to sniff the crate that was loaded. It looked like plywood, but it was solid hash. The dog was only interested in the other dog.
Oh, nice.
So it was a fruitless endeavor, you know. But I'll tell you a funny story. In Nepal, in the 80s, the DEA paid money to the Nepalese and brought them over to America and showed them how to work with drug sniffing dogs. And they gave them 2 drug sniffing dogs to bring back to Nepal to use at the airport. Right. And these dogs were like, $150,000 dogs back in those days. They were trained dogs, dude. They had to have certain appetite, certain foods to eat. They had to be well taken care of. So they hired the DEA, hired the Nepalese. They brought them to America, trained them with the dogs. Then they sent the dogs back with the trainers back to Nepal. But when they brought them back to Nepal, they had people take care of the dogs. They didn't do it themselves. And they're not going to feed dogs meat when they don't eat meat. So the dogs really weren't fed well and weren't taken care of well. So I was at my house, and I had a little stash on me, and I got a little paranoid. Oh fuck, they got these drug sniffing dogs now, man. What if they catch you at the airport? I went to the airport. They brought those two dogs out. They looked like emaciated, like concentration camp victims. The Nepalese couldn't, they couldn't take it. They didn't know how to take care of the dogs, and they weren't going to share good food with those dogs. I think they're a little bit more sophisticated than they are now. But yeah, the patent medicine business, people don't realize that all these companies that you have now are basically made their fortunes on cannabis. Not only that, nowadays, they have so many different medications. They have like THCV, THCB. They have so many different cannabinoids that do different things. So, like, they have a thing now on TV. They sell a thing that to make you lose weight. It's called HTV. Instead of THCV, it's HCV. They left one letter out. So you don't even know what these pharmaceutical companies are giving you. Probably 90% of the medicines that they're putting out now on the counters have some form of cannabis in it. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Joe, I kind of want to fast forward a bit in time a bit. So how did the Dutch become kind of global cannabis seed providers?
Okay, let me get this one straight, and I want the whole world to know, right? The worst thing that ever happened to cannabis has been Anslinger, who created Reefer Madness. And what basically they created that because they didn't want you to be able to grow your own medicine back then, or even really know about how good marijuana is for you. There's a lot of people, you don't have to take marijuana to get high. You're going to take marijuana just to get an appetite, or to give you energy, to do this or to do that. So that was a Anslinger, that Reefer Madness. I mean, if you smoke a joint, you're going to go crazy. You're going to jump out of a building and all this other kind of stuff. And that worked in our favor back in those days, because once you tried marijuana, you realize that all the things that they said about it was untrue. And actually, what marijuana did was unbrainwash you. We've been brainwashed. Once you smoke marijuana, you're unbrainwashed. In fact, the CIA used marijuana as to unbrainwash and to brainwash people. So I mean, it's been used for that. You cannot be a liar and tell untruth if you're high on marijuana. It doesn't work like that way. So it was a wonderful thing. It was a communal thing. We'd all get together in big circles and with a big hookah with a lot of people sitting in a circle smoking and enjoying. It was like a peace and love, and it was the first time that we realized that we've been lied to.
Yeah, it takes a lot of generations for that to spread around, because it's like 50 years later and people are just now figuring that out. Like I said, though, I want to know about the Dutch becoming seed providers to the world.
Well, if that's what you think they did.
Well, that's kind of that was the gist of what the community. It's like, if you wanted genetics, you'd usually pick up a High Times and order from the back of the magazine.
Yeah.
They all came out of Amsterdam. So it's like we didn't really have, I would say in the 90s, I started becoming aware of like TGA Genetics and other California, Oregon breeders, and even Jinx up in Seattle. But prior to that, everything we ever got was from the Dutch. And I'm just curious, how did they become?
That's not true.
Well, say it.
That's not true. That's not true. The first of all, get this straight. The worst thing that ever happened to cannabis, other than Henry Anslinger and Reefer Madness, was that Dutch scene. Okay? The Dutch have been slavers since the 15th century, 16th century. They have the Spice Islands. They would go to the islands and find spices and then kill all the people and take over the spice industry. There were slavers. They still have that mentality. So right now, one of the things so right then they started a seed industry in Bangkok based on seeds that they bought in California. You know, all those cups, all the cups that were won in Amsterdam by Narjan, not Arjan, whatever his name is. Arian. He's a crook. He's a crook. You know, he goes to Africa and gets good seeds and then passes out his seeds with skunk number 1 and feminized seeds and all this other bullshit. So if you go to Africa and you think you're going to find something that's a hidden treasure from the Congo, when you analyze it and you DNA sequence it, it has skunk number 1 in it. Okay. So the Dutch, when they came over, they fucking infiltrated. They wanted to take over. They want you smoking. They want you smoking their shit and nobody else's shit. I was one time in Amsterdam, and this guy, Lawrence Shearnock, he wrote a book, The Great Book of Hashish, and he's never been to a hash producing country. He worked for High Times, and he had access to their libraries. So he wrote this information out, you know, and then he took the pictures that were at High Times, and then he put a book to it, The Great Book of Hashish. And the pictures in those books were taken by Victoria and John Chick they had the first Rose Mushroom, the first discotheque in Kathmandu. They were big players at the time. So the Dutch came over. It was like, you know, people ask me, and I'll ask you, why aren't you buying my weed today? You have an answer for that?
Because I'm growing my own?
No.
Oh, why?
Why? We had our own navies. We had our own air forces. We had our own connections. We had grows in Hawaii. We had grows in Mexico. Mexico had great stuff back in those days. Every state in Mexico had its own weed, right? We grew weed in Hawaii that was fucking outstanding. We grew weed in Thailand. And so we went to the source countries and we were selling source weed. We were selling hash from Lebanon. We're selling hash from Afghanistan, selling hash from Nepal, you know, from source countries. Right. So we control the market, dude. And see and I'm going to answer your question now. So we controlled everything. We even controlled the police on some sections of America where the cops were corrupted, you know? And so the reason that you're not buying my stuff and you're growing your own stuff today is because they let the police get high. Once they let the police smoke weed, they use that as a way to infiltrate the marijuana groups, the syndicates that we had going on in those days.
Birthing the narcs?
The narcs, yeah, they even had narcs in Thailand that would shoot heroin as a way to show that they were cool and you could trust them. So they busted heroin syndicates in Thailand with junkies, DEA agents. So when they let the police get high, then they infiltrated. What happened? Well, you know, somebody delivers 1,000. Somebody calls you up and says, "Hey, you know, or you meet somebody and they sell you some weed. They get high with you now. They party with you, and they sell you a bunch of weed, the best weed you ever got, right? And then they start buying from you." And that's how they took those syndicates down. Because back in those days, nobody, if you didn't get high with us, if you weren't part of our scene, we didn't let you in. It was a very controlled situation, right? And by the way, boys and girls, our shit was better. I haven't smoked anything as close to the Thai weed and the Hawaiian weed or the Afghani stuff or the Lebanese stuff we used to get, or the stuff we got from Africa, the stuff we got from Colombia, the stuff we got from Mexico. Forget about it. I sold weed in New York, Hawaiian weed, right, for $375 an ounce for as many ounces as you want to buy. That was the price. So it was like $6,400 a pound in the 70s and 80s. That's how good that Hawaiian was. One time I was in Amsterdam, and they had this guy, Lawrence Shearnock, who's a complete phony. Well, they were trying to test me to test my knowledge on weed, you know. You got to remember when you're dealing with Joe, I've been through every weed cycle that you've had here in the States. I was with the Mexicans at first, and we did the Colombians, then the Thai. We would always were getting hash in New York. We'd have 10, 15 different kinds of hash. We get 3 or 4 different kinds of Pakistani black, Afghani, different 4 or 5 different kinds of Lebanese. I mean, it was just like great, right? And so, and when they let everybody else, when they let police get high, they kill the scene. Believe you me, if I could get the same Thai, the same Hawaiian, the same hash that I got from Lebanon and from Afghanistan and all this other stuff, this market couldn't compete. You know, the Dutch was the worst thing that ever happened to cannabis. They created something called BHO, butane hash oil. Why would you need butane hash oil when you can make the finest quality sieve, melt in your mouth hash naturally? Why would you add butane to it to process it? By the way, I wrote a paper 15 years ago. It says butane causes cancer. And it does. They'll tell you, oh, we purge it. We purge it. There's nothing left behind. We purge it. That's not true. It can be purged down to about 98, 99%. But that 1% that's left in that BHO is the purest form of butane that you can buy, that you can make. That's what addicts you, and that's what gives you cancer. So 15 years ago, I wrote about it, and the Dutch, oh, Pietri's a snitch. He's this, he's that. Don't listen to him. Meanwhile, now if you go look at it on Google, you have PhDs that come out and say, oh, by the way, they don't say, oh, by the way, Pietri was right 15 years ago. No, they'll try to take credit like, yeah, we discovered that it does cause cancer. You know, why would you take the greatest hash in the world, so strong, you know, and mix it with butane to purify it? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? So
no, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So the Dutch have led everybody down a road where you grow less but spend more. They had a guy in Oregon, George Cervantes. That guy was a crook. He has his book translated in every language. That's what the Dutch do in every country every language in the world. Right? He taught people how to grow indoors using 18.6. Okay, if you try to replicate 18.6 outdoors, you'd need 2 suns. It's a weed, dude. Okay, so they've created all these techniques that have you spending more and growing less. It's so bad that there's I forget the name of the company, but they got stores all over, professional growers or whatever. I went in there and I test them right away and to see what kind of knowledge they got, and they didn't even know what 12-in-1 was. So Cervantes was teaching everybody 18.6, 18.6. So if you went to Southern Oregon, you had these people who were growing greenhouses, right? And they would augment the greenhouse. If there was 1,000 square foot greenhouse, they would put 10 1,000 watt bulbs on, and then when the sun went down, they'd put those lights on so that they would do 18.6 outdoors, right? Of course, by the way, you stood out like the Statue of Liberty for law enforcement when they did that. But two, and this is Nelson's greenhouse operation and management. It's biology 101, right? It tells you that if you put on a light in the middle of the night for an hour, right, the PFR phytochrome level will not reduce itself enough for it to induce flowering. So what you do is you trick the plant into having 2 nights rest, and they grow bigger and faster. That's in biology 101. They left that out of the grow book. Go to any grow book and look for photoperiodic control. Now some of them do it because I've exposed them. But no, they were teaching you how to grow weed indoors and in a greenhouse using 2 suns. What fucking sense does that make? Then they took my friend's formula, which was a NASA formula, that they're in the 50s and 60s when they're doing the space race. They were paying universities to grow weed out in outer space, how to grow weed indoors in outer space in those space stations. And they used a hydroponic system, and they developed a really pure form of nutrients. When my friend took those nutrients to Amsterdam, right, they broke that down into 12 different parts. So now you go there, you need some Cal Mag, or you need this, or you need this, or you need that. And at these shows, I used to laugh at people. They'd come up to me, and they'd have like all shopping bags full of all these nutrients. And I say to them, "What's in your shopping bag?" He said, "Oh yeah, we got all these Dutch nutrients, all this shit, all this shit." I said, "Man, do yourself a favor. Go back, give that stuff, get your money back. Go home, buy a box of organic tomato food, and just give your plants that." They'd go home, they'd use my tomato food, and they grew the best weed they've ever grown. They go, "Oh, you saved us so much money." Yeah, I saved you so much money. You know how many people I've saved in the business because I taught them techniques where they didn't have to use a lot of electricity to keep their plants in veg and in flower?
I think a lot of the people now that are doing like living soil applications have learned that with just some very basic amendments, you can give the plant everything it needs for a very long time. So
the thing about living soil is that you have to you have to make it. So you have to, like me. I turn my own. I make my own soil. I make my own soil. But people who make it now, they have a thing that you can put on your countertop and put your scraps in there. Turns it into dirt. So things are advancing on that level. But as far as a living soil, living soils are good. Everybody uses living soil. That's composting. That's a basic 101. If you don't compost your shit, I mean, come on. So it's composting. You know what I mean? So yeah, more people are getting into composting. But you have a guy. He calls himself is it the professor, the guy from up there who writes for all the magazines? I forget his name. You probably because he's come out promoting living soil. Like if he invented it. Living soil is biology 101, dude. All the shit is fucking basic shit, man. That basically they got away with it because none of you guys are real farmers.
Well, I think that so for us, a lot of that kind of knowledge base started happening when Subcool and TGA started that super soil movement. A lot of us guys that were hooked on all these dumbass bottles full of water started seeing that you could build a soil, cook it, and rock it. And so I think that's what kind of opened people's minds to that idea.
Let me just say something to you. Subcool was a good guy. I was at a Cannabis Cup, the 19th Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, and he had the best shit there. And DNA Genetics were next door to me on where I had my booth, and they had some stuff that they called Martian Mean Grain. And they showed it to me. They said, I'm going to win a cup with this. And I said, man, how can you win a cup with that when this guy, look what this guy has here. He says, no, we're going to win a cup. At that cup, they were awarded a cup. They rented a discotheque, and they had a music there and stuff. And for doing that, they got a cup for the worst weed that you've ever seen in your life. Okay, so the Subcool was a good guy, and he did a lot to enlighten people. But what he enlightened people to was something that's basic farmer knowledge. You know, none of you people were farmers before. Now you're having to learn how to make your own soil, make your own this, make your own that. But that's been in the books since forever. I mean, Nelson's greenhouse management and greenhouse management and operation. That's in its 10th edition. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's right there. And so, Subcool. Subcool did some good things. As far as people that I know, he was one of the nicer ones who did speak some truth and come up with some nice stuff. You know what I mean? But none of that shit comes close to the Hawaiian that was growing in fucking in Hawaii that was getting $6,400 a pound in New York 40 years ago, dude.
Can you describe that? What did it taste like or smell like?
Well, let me just tell you, they brought this guy to me, and I've been through all the beasters, I've been through all the types of weed, selling them, and been to every producing country in the world. They brought me something. They said, well, what does this taste like to you? And so they gave me the joint. It was a mixture, and in the end, it had that Hawaiian bite to it, right? And so I said, yeah, it's okay. I said, but in the end, I had that Hawaiian flavor. I just want the whole joint Hawaiian. I don't want all the other shit that you've got mixed in here, right? So the guy got all flustered, and then they brought the farmer over. He said, well, this guy's right, because the stuff that really gives this stuff the bang is the Hawaiian that it's cut into. So a lot of this shit that you see now that you think is so fucking great is fucking original genetics that they've been using and reusing. I mean, I hear you have a couple of companies that sell seeds, right? I have a seed bank, and now I have a seed company with another Seed is Art, and I made sure that in my collection I don't have anything mixed. All this stuff is either original or stuff that came out of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I don't have skunk number 1 in any of my shit. Okay, I made sure of that.
Go ahead and talk about that a little bit. I seen Todd McCormick on an interview a couple weeks ago, clouting and touting Mel Frank and Skunk Man Sam as people who are founders of the breeding scene and the breeders.
No, that's not true. By the way, those guys in the I think the first time this book, I forget his grow book came out, he came out in his grow book and said, and he was talking about land races and this and that. He said, well, let me buy this first, and we'll talk about land races. He says it's true that that scientists worked along with law enforcement to quantify and qualify the loads coming in. No, there were DEA scientists. The Skunk Man, Robert Connolly Clark, Mel Frank, all these motherfuckers are the heat, dude. And during when High Times was taken over by Steve, what's his name? I'll think of it in a minute. He was like the worst fucking. He takes claim of for inventing the Cannabis Cup because he's the first Cannabis Cup was in Holland. The Skunk Man appeared out of nowhere. First of all, both of the Skunk Man, Connolly Clark, all these guys, they all studied under the professor who ran the marijuana project out of the University of Mississippi. Right? Okay. One, he told everybody that he was wanted, that he was wanted for a drug bust, a grow bust in California, but he managed to escape out of California and take his seed bank with him. Right? Then he's on the run supposedly and hiding out in Asia in Amsterdam, and he is given a license to produce the first medical quality grade seeds before universities and PhDs. His endorsement by the Drug Enforcement Agency was so strong, they gave him the license before anybody else. He went on to create, from Horta Farm, he went on to create the company in England that makes cannabis tinctures and cannabis vapes. I'll think of the name in a minute. My memory's cloudy. I'm a little old, but those guys are cops. And I was at the 19th Cup, and he came up to my booth, and I had Kelly Kay from Canada, who's like a 6'8" Canadian, and he comes up to me and he says, "What's to prevent me from coming across this table? You exposed me. You blew my cool." I said, "Man, don't you know that I know what the fucking police look like? You're the fucking police." So I called him out very beginning, and then they started telling me, "Oh, he's the police. Oh, he's this or he's that." No, you got infiltrated through High Times in the '80s, and you came onto the scene out of nowhere. Robert Connolly Clark used to write under the code name R in High Times magazine. These guys are all narcs, man. How the fuck do you write for the UN World Drug Report and not be the police? Answer that. Hello?
No, we're here. We're just taking it in, man. But
how exactly? You can't fucking answer it. Yeah. How do you write for the UN World Drug Report and not be the police? Come on, man. Answer me. You can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. Even the Skunk Man puts his name, because he's such an egotist. He puts his name in the World Drug Reports about his skunk seeds. His skunk seeds ain't shit. All they do is make you paranoid. Dude, during the 90s, about 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, it looked like they were going to have a medical scene. When we had the medical scene in California and in Oregon and in Colorado, we thought the Rastas were going to make it medical in Brixton. And the Rastas started selling weed in Brixton, and it was opening up again. And GW Pharmaceuticals went up to the Skunk Man and said, "We want you to create a weed that's like heroin. Once you take a hit, it makes you so paranoid and so crazy that you never want to smoke again." And that's what they did. They created a super paranoid weed, and they had this whole thing in England. The skunk craze, and people going crazy and having to go into the hospital after smoking skunk number one. Well, they created that thing, and then the whole legal scene, medical scene went out the window, and they reclassified it in England because GW Pharmaceuticals could not afford to have a California scene in England when they're charging $300 a gram for weed.
Well, awesome. Thanks, man, for filling us in on all this. You've given us a lot to think about. We're running out on the end of our time on the hour. You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to give you a chance to talk
Bro,
about.
you need to have me on for like 5 or 6 hours so that we can hip the people of your generation, because Todd McCormick is a total scumbag. Todd McCormick, he stopped me from having my show in L.A. because the Dutch told him we don't want Pietri here talking his shit, because Pietri is going to talk the real shit. Fuck, the Dutch aren't shit. What are they want you to buy their Acapulco gold from them? You don't want to buy it from Acapulco?
I think you just gave me, I was trying to figure out what I was going to title this on YouTube, and I think maybe the episode title is Joe Pietri Talks the Real Shit.
Yeah. The real shit. McCormick was a total scumbag. He just not a good person. Bubble Man, that guy Bubble Man, he's not a good person. First time I met the Bubble Man, I was at the Tokers Bowl, in the first Tokers Bowl in Canada, and he says, "Man, he was showing those bags off, and I wasn't impressed with that." And he said, "Look, man, I need to. You have an ounce of weed. Give it to me. I'm going to use it for demonstration. At the end of the show, I'll give it back to you." At the end of the show, I gave it to him. At the end of the show, I asked for it back. He says, were you going to ask me for weed? All the weed I've given out? Fuck, man. That's the kind of introduction I get. You couldn't even be friendly with him. You couldn't even trust him on a trustworthy thing. He ripped off. He didn't create it. Mila was under contract with Ice Cold. They were the ones that invented the ice water technique. The ice water technique was the biggest improvement in hash making in 5,000 years. I can make hash so pure that you don't want it. Most people, it's too strong for. So why would you want to process it with butane? So he taught a technique. By the way, when you use those bags, you lose 30% because they'll tell you, oh, don't never mind with those little terpenes and those. Just go for the big heads. But the little terpenes are the ones with the flavor, taste, and longevity of the weed. You ever get weed nowadays? You smoke it, you're high for like 15 minutes, and then it don't get you high anymore. You know that kind of weed?
Yes, I've experienced that recently.
I have.
That's feminized seeds. That's auto-flowering seeds. They don't have the lasting power. They're all those little terpenes you've left in the water.
So,
right?
So speaking of seeds, Joe, where can people find your seeds at? And tell us about that.
Okay, I partnered up with Seed is Art. They own Highland High Farms in Colorado and Highland High Farms in Michigan. They have 4 farms in both of the states, each of the states. They've got dispensaries in each of the states. They do everything. The CFO Chaz is my partner, and Seed is Art. They are going through my entire collection, and we're blowing out hundreds and hundreds of seeds and picking out the best examples of everything. And that's what we're breeding. I just upgraded my seed bank quality wise. You can't touch them anywhere. You know
So
what I
can you
mean?
give us a website or a way that people can get in contact?
Seedisart.com.
All right, excellent. Seedisart.com. We'll put that link in the description when we post this video.
Oh yeah, they have a little AI thing with me riding a Tibetan pony. Unbelievable. AI is unbelievable. We just finished the my Durban Poison. I have like the finest one in the world. You know, my Durban Poison went on to create cookies, to create Durban thin mints. You know, people rip me off all the fucking time. You know, and you got all these guys that they're seed banks. They don't even know anything about where the fuck the seeds come from.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I know where all my shit comes from. I collected it myself.
That's excellent. Well, this is the end of the show, Joe. We want to give you one last chance to do a shout out. So go ahead and give a shout out if you want.
Well, we need to do more shows because
yes, we do.
Generations that are going that are learning about cannabis, they need to learn the right truth, the right way of doing things, you know. And so, and basically, when you buy seeds nowadays, you don't know what the fuck you're buying. If you ever had to try to replicate that, how do you replicate something that's been mixed 30 times?
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. So we will definitely have you back on the show, Joe. And I do want to thank you for your time.
Let me ask you a question.
History lesson.
Okay, before we do that, I've got a lot more history to talk to you about.
Well, I'll have to have you back on, Joe.
Let's end the show, but I want to talk to you after the show.
All right. Excellent. Deal.
Well, thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a comment on YouTube or on Spotify. Make sure to like and subscribe and all those things. Shout outs to our supporters, everyone in the cannabis community, as well as sacred3mushrooms.com, lostcoastplanttherapy.com, rawgenetics.io, and TikiMadMan over at TikiSeeds.
TikiSeeds.com and TikiCuts. And you could also find Secret Selections .io for some cuts as well.
Awesome.
I have I have my new I'm replicating my whole collection. So every 3 months I've got more strains. I in the 70s and 80s I was running a lot of weed, and I had a warehouse in Colorado. And so at the end of the summer, we'd have at the end of the year, we'd have number 10 cans full of seeds. And we used to give those seeds to people that we knew in Kansas, and they would grow them in their father's cornfields. They would plant seeds in between the corn, and then they would cut the plants down before they cut the corn. It was always seeded. And but the flavors and the taste, some smelled like cat piss, some like dog shit, some like really gaseous. All these strains came out of there. And at first, when I started getting them, I couldn't sell them because I was only selling Sensimilla. I took those to California and I sold them to the farmers up in Northern California. And from those strains came the foundation of all the strains that you see today. You know what I mean? From those seeds that we created in Kansas.
Well, we would love to have you come back on, Joe.
Yeah, well, we're already
I'm replicating. I have with Seed is Art. I have tissue culturing. So I'm tissue culturing seeds from the 60s and the 70s. I just tissue cultured my Durban from the 60s that I collected.
That's awesome.
I have Thai from the golden Buddha weed that I'm replicating. I've got black Colombian that I'm replicating. I'm pricey. I'm not going to be with these guys selling you cheap seeds they don't even know what the fuck they got. It's going to be pricey, but it's going to be hand selected.
That's awesome.
It's a preservation thing that we're doing. We're preserving these strains and then we're creating new stuff for the future too.
Well, a lot of our audience is interested in that kind of stuff, so I'm glad that we got you to shout out the site. Everyone's gonna have to check that out. We really appreciate your time. We're going to let our podcast listeners go. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And as always, JR,
Growers love.
peace.
Okay, now